So we'll do a bit of questions. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions dans la salle? Vous pouvez les poser soit en anglais, soit en français, et on fera la traduction.
My French is not really good anymore, but
We'll do the translation. Maybe if you want to grab your headset. Alors je veux bien qu'on allume la salle pour que je puisse voir s'il y a des mains qui se lèvent. Oui, là-bas, on vous écoute.
Oui, une question en français, si vous voulez bien la traduire. Est-ce que ces petits quartiers autonomes ressemblent à ce qu'on appelle aux États-Unis des gated communities, c'est-à-dire ce qui pour nous en France est une perception très négative, je crois, mais j'ai pas l'impression que ce soit ce que vous décrivez. Mais quelles sont les nuances, s'il vous plaît?
yes, I got the question. I do not know where the person is, but
Over there.
over there. Okay, good. Yes, if you think about gated communities, you have that in countries where there's a lot of income disparity, and people that have the money to separate themselves, they will do so. So you got this in the US, you got this South Africa also for security reasons. Johannesburg, I've seen this. These are gated communities, but the income disparity between the individual communities is very small very often. So it's a very different dynamic. These gated communities originated because people had to take care to say it very bluntly, the Balinese took care of the Balinese. And there was no justice system or government that helped them out. So they needed to take care of them themselves, and this is where that then came from. But there is no negative connotation to this whatsoever in Indonesia and in Java. Indeed, most of them see this as something very positive. They feel part of a community. The chairman of the gated community is somebody that is somewhat respected very often in that community. They feel it, Indonesians feel proud of it. The word gotong royong that I mentioned, that mutual assistance that is associated with it. So they feel that's something really part of their own culture, of communal sharing, I would say. Very socialist in a sense, and not capitalist in a gated community sense that you are probably talking about. So my impression would be that most Jakartans are very happy with this and feel very much part of that community. I'll give you a nice example. My wife comes originally from one of these communities. She was born in Jakarta. One of the people in that area is mentally disabled. So they have made him the guard, and everybody pays him. He wouldn't find another job somewhere else. He would probably struggle in life if he was completely on his own. But by giving him a job, they give him a purpose and a reason to pay him and for him to make a living. And this is a way of dealing with that. So I'd say in this way, it's actually considered to be something very positive, very different dynamic.
Thank you. Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions? Oui, par là. On vous écoute.
Merci. Thank you for your presentation. Je vais vous poser la question en français aussi. Ces communautés autonomes, est-ce qu'elles sont toutes structurées de la même manière? Est-ce qu'elles se ressemblent toutes? Ou bien est-ce qu'elles obéissent à des fonctionnements qui sont différents, voire à des règles? Je m'intéresse beaucoup à la structure de communautés autonomes locales qui finalement via de l'empirisme, des pratiques qui ne sont pas ancrées, enfin qui sont ancrées par la tradition, forment finalement des normes spontanées. Est-ce que vous avez observé ce type de structure presque normative également dans ces communautés? Merci.
Yeah, that is a very complex question actually, because in the past, these units would be self-servant in the sense that they would have their own judiciary system. So the Chinese, for example, had their own lawyers, their own police. They took care of themselves. Somebody did something bad to somebody else, they would handle it. Nobody else. Only the Dutch would maybe step in as kind of the overmasters of the city in the time, if it would flow over to other communities or it was a problem to them. Otherwise, they wouldn't really care. That has been the case for a long time, but of course you have Indonesian law in place now, so it's not that these communities can move away from that. But if there are internal problems, they will, if possible, deal with it themselves. But there is a dynamic that in certain places this is breaking down. because what you do see is that, in particular in the center of Jakarta, where property price is very high, the original Betawi people that I mentioned, they used to live there in, say, the 70s and 80s, but they are now moving south simply because they sell their land. They can hardly afford living in central Jakarta anymore, and they therefore move further south to other areas, and they re-establish these units there again. But in central Jakarta, that mechanism is breaking down because people build bigger houses, they're on their own, they put a gate around their own house, and they are not as communal anymore. So the structure of the city is there, but the mechanism of how that works, if, for example, there's an area called Menteng, doesn't work as much anymore. Now that's only the real heart, the place where property prices in Jakarta are as higher maybe than Paris. That's really where billionaires people live. An average house would cost you $10 million or something like that. So that's where that breaks down. But in 90% of the rest of Jakarta, that is still the case. And they have their own traditions. There are kampungs where people live. They still have the Betawi traditions. So you see these puppets. If somebody gets married, for example, it's easy to identify. There are other kampungs where people live that come from Bali, and they try to keep these traditions together. But over the years, that will mingle, of course. You get intermarriages, cultures shift a bit. So that is not as strong now as it was maybe 40 or 50 years ago.
Thank you so much. Et est-ce qu'il y a une dernière question avant que nous passions à nos interventions conclusives? Oui, tout au fond là-bas. Merci beaucoup. We'll have one last question.
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation. I was wondering, there's obvious benefits and a real role that's played by these kampungs, like you've mentioned, but they're quite historically rooted, as you've explained. But because there's such a big makeup of the urban area, especially in Jakarta, I'm wondering if they're present in many of the other cities, or in the case of the new capital city that they want to build, if it's a planning practice that they want to replicate or something they want to build on, or if it's just been kind of this example of the history that will not play a role in future developments.
It's a good question. I actually don't know. I mean, for the new capital, my suspicion is that this has not been built into the city, that this is a city built from the top down, whereby people have said this is how we want to build, and they want to make it a modern city, a smart city, and these sort of things. So I don't think that they paid attention to this necessarily so. What could happen that it could spontaneously emerge. People just live there and they set up their own sort of kampungs again. That might well happen, but at the moment there is hardly anything there in the new city, so we don't know. But if you go to other cities in Indonesia, very similar patterns have emerged. So it's something maybe that's cultural in a sense. But if you go to Surabaya or Yogyakarta in Java, you go to Sumatra, in the larger cities, the dynamics are very much the same. They also have these RW sort of neighborhood system in these cities. Because these cities, just like Jakarta, emerged in very similar ways. They were port cities, and people, as a magnet, moved there and had very similar dynamics in how they developed. It's only that in Jakarta this was magnified very much. So that, and then actually answering your question, thinking then if this is such a spontaneous thing that happened in these cities, it is very likely that that will happen in the new capital as well. But I suspect that the planners of that city haven't really thought that through. I don't know, to be extremely frank, because I've not been involved with that particular process. But I don't think that I've never heard anybody talking about this in that sense.
Thank you so much, Herald. Thank you very much for coming here. Thank you.